Hey everybody, it's Eric alongside Rod here to talk about MSU's upcoming game against the Oregon Ducks as they return back to the friendly confines of the Breslin Center. Before we begin, just a quick reminder that if you like what we're doing here at TFF Finance and impressed that we bring you contact even from the airport so you don't miss a thing, head on over to our support page at thefinalfoursontheschedule.com/support to find ways to make one-time or recurring gifts. Also, be sure to subscribe and like the show on your podcast player or on YouTube. So Rod, Michigan State, as mentioned, returns home for Saturday meeting with Oregon, leaving a miserable Los Angeles here as we leave the rain. Oregon is 16-7 overall, 5-7 in the Big Ten. So that means that they were undefeated coming into the Big Ten season, and now they have taken all their loss in the Big Ten. They're 5-7 with we're 11 bringing an 11-0 record into the Big Ten, and was kind of impressive. They were highly ranked coming into the season or into the Big Ten season. They're now down to 37th on Ken Palm.
Yeah, and it is worth mentioning that they still have, I think it's the third most quad one victories. They've got eight. Some of that's come in conference play, of course, but a lot of that came in an impressive non-conference performance. They won one of those $100,000 jackpot WAD tournaments in Las Vegas. They beat Alabama for sure. I think they might have beaten Texas A&M as well in that tournament, but regardless, it was very impressive. But that's been the peak since they've gotten back since they've gotten into conference play. I say 5-7. They've struggled. They've particularly what's been notable. They've taken three home court losses. That's in the Big Ten in general. Tough to override that in a season. In a situation like they're in, where you're going to be making four trips, and I think they're in the midst of one right now. They've got either one or two more to go before the season's over. When you got to make that many trips out east, it's really bad to take those home court losses. Like that's one thing UCLA has done a decent job of. I think they've only taken one on home court. I think so. If you're out there, you got to take care of business at home, and they have not done that. So they're 5-7 now, and it may actually get worse.
Yeah, that's trouble. So just specifically about the Ducks, they're on offense. They've been okay, solid, but not anything that really points out as a huge strength. They definitely shoot well on twos and free throws. They're 84th from twos, top 100 free throws, 76% from the line when they get there. Their turnover percentage is they're 131st, so they're kind of so-so. Not a good offensive rebounding team at 173rd. And from three, they're 206, which, is good compared to Michigan State, but they're shooting only 33% for the season, so not great. On defense, uh, it's beginning to get worse and worse, I guess you'd say, throughout the year. They're now not doing well against the twos, which is a problem. They're also not defensive rebounding very well. They're 154th defensive rebounding and 167th so the 157 and then 167th against the defensive rebounding. They don't foul much, which is maybe a sign that they don't get close enough to you to guard well, which is probably maybe part of the problem as well. And they've been pretty good against the threes as far as volume and defense, but those other things are causing some problems with their defense, obviously. They do play fast. Their tempo's 118th, so it'll be nice for Michigan State to get out and run a little bit more, we expect in this game. And their offensive possession is pretty quick at 100 at 76, so that's a pretty fast team.
Yeah, I think that the offense had been the strength early on, but that's starting to wane. They slipped three spots just after this loss today to Michigan, as we're recording this at LAX, to give you some insight behind the scenes as to what we do here at Final Four is not on the schedule. We're at a gate nailing this. But yeah, the offense has been slipping, and when you don't get second chance points, you're middling in turnovers, and you don't shoot well from two or from three, really, it's going to be tough to do very well. The thing is, the defense arguably worse. Poor defensive rebounding, poor against twos. Yes, they've done a good job. They're kind of middle of the pack in terms of 3-point volume against. Better than that in terms of percentage against. But when you're giving up things from two, it's going to be a problem for you to consistently contain opponents. And that, in fact, is exactly what Oregon's been dealing with. So when you look at the overall profile of this team, you noted they do play relatively fast. They're not Iowa. but inside the top 100 in average length of offensive possession. So that tells you that the intent for Dana Altman's team is to play fast at least. But you look at the overall picture, and there's not a lot that's just truly horrible, but there also aren't a lot of things that are great strengths. And so what that adds up to is kind of a, at the Big Ten level, kind of a middling team. And that's sort of where Oregon settled in. I mean, I was there with most people early on. You looked at that non-conference performance and the way they started Big Ten play. You felt, okay, this is a team that maybe can compete for a top four spot and a good seed in March. And now, I mean, with 8 quad 1 wins, they're going to have to absolutely butcher the rest of this season to miss the tournament. But don't rule it out. Not completely. Not when they've lost games at home the way they have, and they've still got these games on the road, against Eastern teams. I think they may be done with their fellow West Coast teams. If they're not, they're very close. So everything else is going to be against a quote unquote traditional Big Ten. A lot of those on the road. You know, I mean, does a 9-11 Oregon team get into the NCAA tournament? Probably because of those quad 1 wins. But it's starting to get to the point, not in terms of where they sit as we talk at this moment, but if you look at the trajectory and you imagine, you look at those games remaining and say, boy, how many of these could they lose? Could they end up 9-11, 8-12? You start to wonder, you really do. Might they end up a lot closer to the bubble than anybody thought even a couple weeks ago?
Yeah, it's very surprising because, I mean, we weren't expecting a lot to start. We weren't expecting much to start the season. We started kind of middle of the pack, Big Ten team, and then they were so good early, or at least very impressive wins against, programs we assumed are good. Although you never know in the non-conference, right? And it's obviously different. But we see this plenty of times in basketball. When you peak is as much as important as, who you beat in some respects. And so this is a team that clearly peaked early. I mean, it doesn't mean they can't come back, but does not bode well right now the way they're playing.
And we're seeing exactly what you just described with the last game. If you got UCLA in the first week of January, they were not what they are right now. They've broken through to another level, certainly in terms of their toughness, their physicality. With Oregon, it's kind of the opposite. The teams they beat in that jackpot wad tournament are legit. Like they've gone on to have good seasons. So it's not like they beat teams like some years, there's been an occasional year where MSU might beat Duke or beat Kentucky in the Champions Classic, and we all think it's a big deal. And then you look back at the end in March, and those teams aren't anything close to what people figured they were going to be. North Carolina this year may be an example of that. Uh, that's not the case with the teams Oregon beat. So I said this on the Spartan Mag board about a week or so ago. I said, I'm beginning to think that we're going to look back in March and say, how the hell did Oregon beat those teams? And right now, and I'm not trying to make them out as a disaster. They're not Minnesota. They're not Washington. They're fully capable of beating Michigan State if they don't play well, and if Oregon plays out of their heads a little bit, that's entirely possible. They're not devoid of talent. They've got experience. Dana Altman's a good coach. All that's true, but you just look at the general trajectory of what they've been doing, and it's it's a hard fall from grace over the last month.
All right, so let's talk about the opposing lineup brought to you by the Brothers Gesture Gutters. So we're just out in California. It was raining, and just because of brothers, I now look at gutters when I go on vacation walking in LA. Our place did not have gutters and water dripping everywhere. So make sure you're not that person. Make sure you've got some good gutters and operational. We obviously get far more rain than they do in Southern California. So make sure you talk to the brothers because they can take care of it, whether you have gutters that are working or not working. They can clean them out. They can make sure they can spiff them up. They can add more, maybe free business, whatever you need done. Put leaf guards on so you no longer have to clean them out, get on the ladders. So talk to the brothers at Just the Gutters, and they sponsor the player that Michigan State needs to keep in the gutter. I'll begin with the starting lineup: Jackson Shelsted, 6 foot sophomore. Uh, he's actually point guard. I feel like half the time we talk about these teams, they don't have point guards, but Oregon does. He's averaging 12 and a half points a game, 3 assists a game while shooting 43, 37, and 88.
Yeah, he's a really good player, and he's got to carry a lot of the offensive responsibility for this team. I don't know if I'm convinced that he's a true point guard in the way that some other guys in this league are, like Braden Smith or Jeremy Fears or some others. The assist totals are okay. It's about three a game. His ratio's okay. It's 2 to 1. That's like a bare minimum acceptability, but he doesn't make as many plays for teammates as you would think of with a true point guard. But what he is a very dynamic offensive player in his own right, getting his own shots. He shoots the three reasonably well. He's quick. He can be very aggressive. Um, and his numbers on the year, his efficiency is solid at least. And he's only a sophomore, so he's got room to grow. I think he is a good player and maybe will be an even better one down the line.
And then moving on to Keyshawn Bartholomew, 6'1" senior, started his career at Colorado. He's now at Oregon, obviously, been transferred a couple years ago. He's averaging 9.7 points a game on 41, 40, and 86 shooting. And so half his shots are from deep. So he's definitely, they definitely have a couple of outside threats, and he's one of them.
Yeah, that's his primary role. About half his shots come from deep. He's been a reasonably accurate shooter. Had a good game today, I think, against Michigan from three to help keep them in it. That's primarily what he is. He's a guy that's been in the program for a couple of years, so he's not new to what Dana Altman wants. But yeah, the perimeter, the jump shot is the primary service that he's providing for that team. And he's only recently been elevated in the starting lineup. He's been more of a sixth man most of the way. So remains to be seen if Oregon will stick with that lineup or not. But that's what we're going with here.
Moving on, we have TJ Bamba, 6'3" senior. He played Villanova previously and Washington State. He's a physical wing. It's not been a great shooting this year. He's averaging 10.7 points a game on 36, 25, and 75 shooting and pulling down almost 4 rebounds a game.
Yeah, it hasn't quite gone quite according to plan for TJ Bamba. And I don't mean that to be too derogatory because he's an impactful offensive player. He's second in assists. I believe he leads them in steals. He's double digit scorer, decent rebounder. He's a 6'5" power guard, but the efficiency numbers are not great. And I think 2 years ago, he had had a great season at Washington State, transferred to Villanova, and there were huge expectations for him. And he was okay, wasn't bad, but he wasn't what they thought he was going to be. Transfers to Oregon, and again, the hope is okay, he's back on the West Coast in the Pacific Northwest. He's going to find that game again and be, I think they expected more of like a 15, 16 point a night guy, and they're getting a 10 point a night guy. Not bad when you consider the totality of the ways he contributes, but maybe not the offensive reliable piece that I think people thought they were getting.
Next, we have COVID senior, 6'9", uh, transfer from Stanford, Brandon Angel. He's averaging almost 10 points a game on 57, 39, and 81 shooting. He's gives him some offensive versatility and he's a little bit of a stretch, pulling down 4 rebounds a game.
Yeah, nice addition with that stretchability, and he gives them a little bit of rebounding. The Pac-12 refugee from Stanford decided he didn't want to play in the ACC, he wanted to play in the big leagues, which I can hardly believe I'm saying given my grounding in the ACC is a great league, which it's clearly not right now. But in any event, Angel's a nice addition. He's playing a role for them as a power forward, and he's a threat as a shooter. So he's somebody Michigan State's going to have to locate on the perimeter and close on him, not let him get open looks because he's good enough to do damage if you let him do that.
And finally, rounding out the starting five is Nate Biddle, 7 foot senior. He's had some injuries early in his career, but he's back. He's leading the team in scoring at 12.7 points a game. Leads the rebounding as well, 7.2 rebounds a game, 2 blocks a game, and tends to hit his free throws pretty well. He's supposed to be a stretch, but he's not averaging great from outside this year. He's under 30%, I think, from three.
He was before today. I gather. I haven't looked at all the stats, how updated they were. I think he might have just climbed to around the 30% mark because he had a big day shooting the three against Michigan, but it's been a struggle. But that said, look, this is a guy having a great year. He had always shown potential, but the deal with him was he had injury problems. I think he missed either all of or most of last year, if I remember correctly, at least a significant chunk. And so weren't quite sure what they were getting. One, could he stay healthy? That was a big question, right? Well, he stayed healthy so far, and he's been really good. He's their leading scorer, he's their leading rebounder. blocks 2 shots a game, um, reasonably efficient from two, decent free throw shooter. He doesn't get there as much, only averages about 3 free throw attempts a game, so he doesn't get there as much as you'd expect from a five. But he's a good player. It's just that thing that they thought would maybe make him special, the ability to hit the three and really force defenses to extend, that hasn't been there until, I guess, today at Chrysler. We'll see if he can repeat that at Breslin. Hopefully not. But he's a nice player. He's their best player. I mean, it's he and Shellstead. Those are the two guys that make this thing go. And if you have a way of limiting those guys, you're a long way toward a victory because to date on the season, they haven't gotten enough from the guys around those two. And those two, for as good as they've been, neither one of them is even averaging 13 points a game. So, I mean, Jaden Akins is averaging more than that to lead Michigan State. So it puts it into perspective. They haven't had that one guy consistently breaking through with 17, 18 a night.
Yeah, I guess, tonight against Michigan, Bartholomew was about 13, 14 points. So he's that third scorer, and that's why, and they were almost in that, they almost won that game too.
And Bamba can do it on a given night as well. I mean, it's not that they can't do it, but I'm just saying on a consistent basis, they're not they're not getting enough around those two main guys because I do think it's pretty clear the point guard and the center are their two best players.
Moving on to the reserves, and we Jadrian Tracy, 6'5", fifth-year senior. He's been at Oregon for a couple years. Started at St. Joe's and played at Florida Southwestern. He's been a starter until just recently, replaced by Bartholomew, averaging 7.7 points a game, shooting 49, 34, and 76. And so, another guy, okay from three.
Yeah, and a decent scorer, nothing spectacular, but a good solid sixth man. And as you said, actually, most of the season he's been a starter. Another one of these guys that he hasn't been in that program for 5 years, but he's been there for a couple, so he's not brand new. And they've been able to use him effectively now. And as I say, kind of more of a sixth man role. He's less of a perimeter threat than Bartholomew, which is I think the difference. He's okay as a shooter, not as good as Bartholomew, and maybe not instinctively as good a scorer.
And then the best, this might be the best named player in the Big Ten, I think, is Supreme Cook. So he's 6'9", 230-pound senior transfer from Georgetown. Played at Fairfield. He's averaging 6 points a game, 2.8 rebounds a game, and it's good. He's a backup at the four and plays the five as well.
You remember the Wahab kid that played at Maryland, uh, Maryland, and then Penn State, with Georgetown in between a couple of times. Um, this kid also came over from Georgetown, and Cook had really good numbers at Georgetown last year. So you say, okay, Big East, productive numbers, that should translate, right? He's okay. He's a decent backup five, but they thought this might be a guy who could even challenge Biddle for a starting spot or maybe even push for time at the four. Has not happened. And the numbers are not at the same level they were at Georgetown, which goes to show you, and I raised Wahab because it was a similar thing. Putting up numbers in a bad team, even a bad team in a good league, can be misleading.
Yeah, so I don't know. I was just thinking, we got great Ozabor and Supreme Cook, so we have two very confident parents naming their babies. Moving on to Kwame Evans, 6'9", 220-pound sophomore. He's a McDonald's All-American. He's only averaging 5.6 points a game on 36, 22, and 73 with a rebound. I'm not sure what his rebounding games, but plays about 15 minutes a game.
People, it's unfortunate because Michigan State had a really good class in this particular year, but the class of 23 nationally, the word was this is not a great class, especially at the top. And I think, at Michigan State, we've seen, for example, Xavier Booker have growing pains. He has flashes, he shows moments, but he's not nearly what you would normally expect from a guy in the top 10, top 15, McDonald's All-American. Well, Oregon's got a couple of guys like that of their own. One of them, Mookie Cook, doesn't even regularly play. This guy, Kwame Evans, at least regularly plays, but it's funny. He showed some signs toward the end of last season. Maybe he was starting to get it, and then it hasn't happened this year. He's okay, but expectations he hasn't come close to meeting. And given the way of the world, I mean, you could say this about Xavier Booker, although I don't think it'll be the case. But you almost wonder if if maybe there'll be a thought that, hey, he needs a change of scenery, on the himself or the people who are around him, because when you see this, uh, rarely does a player or the people around them say, yeah, he's just got to work harder. That might be where Xavier Booker's actually at. I think there's a good chance of that. But in this case, I would just keep my eye on that. He's got talent. He's a kid with legit size, yet he supposedly has the ball skills. You can't, again, like Booker, we all say, and we know he can shoot because we've seen him do it. But man, you look at the seasonal numbers, you wouldn't think so. Same thing here.
And finally, we have Raheem Morris, 6'3" senior transfer from Toledo, averaging 1.5 points a game on 39 and 71 shooting.
39, 9, and 71. That's 0-9 from 3-point land. There's an interesting thing with Toledo point guards. Michigan had a kid, was it Jerron Simmons, I think was his name, probably during the Howard era. And they thought, yeah, he'd been all MAC from Toledo. They thought this guy solves our problem. In fact, it was the year after they had the kid Mike Smith who came in from Columbia and played so well for them. And everybody thought Juwan's got a magic touch with the portal. Well, they found out differently. That kid in particular could never earn regular minutes. It was just a disaster at the high major level. Now there was another kid, what was his name? Ray J. He ended up at Oregon. Another point guard, or not Oregon, I'm sorry, at Baylor. Played the last year, played very well, had a very good season. So that translated. Now this year, we have this young man, Raheem Morris. Great numbers at Toledo last year, all MAC kind of guy, not translating even a little bit. So once again, goes to show you, you can't automatically plug in expectations for a guy transferring up from that level to the Big Ten level. There is very little predictability with it, and sometimes it works. Sometimes they're even better. I think about the big kid, Conan Niederhaus, I think, from Penn State. Northern Illinois, he was just kind of a guy. He's been great at Penn State. So occasionally it happens that way. More often than not, it's like this.
So is it safe to say that life's not just a video game where where you can just plug in numbers?
That would be correct.
All right. So, sponsored by the Brothers Just Who Got Us a player to keep in the gutter. Just a quick reminder too, if you want to get your gutter work, go to support page, tffi.ts.com/support. When you get your estimate, 10% off. You mentioned Final Four. So, Rod, who do you have as a player that Michigan State needs to keep in the gutter?
Well, it's a close call because again they've got two guys that are very similar scorers. I'm gonna go with Biddle. I'm gonna go with Biddle. He's been a little bit better, maybe a little bit more consistent than Shellstead. And I think he will prove to be a challenge for Michigan State to guard, but it's one that I think they have the potential to rise up and meet. So we'll go with him.
All right, that brings us to the Squeegee Squad. Who cleans the glass best by for Michigan State. Of course, these guys are mainly playing the paint. And if you need paint done, the Squeegee Squad is a great place to call. They do some interior painting this time in the winter. You get 15% off as a listener to the show. Just contact them at our support page. The Final Four is on the schedule.com/support. There you can find a link to get a hold of Troy and his team. Not only do they do the interior painting, if you need a room spiffed up or fixed, if you pick the wrong paint color like I've done in the past, you can also have them obviously clean your windows. They can clean the house with a power washer and take care of your sidewalks, those sorts of things. So contact the Squeegee Squad of Grand Rapids. They have a much larger region than just Grand Rapids, includes Kalamazoo and the large metro area, and they've even gone all the way out to Lansing, and they've taken care of the windows of the state capitol. So they can take care of the state capitol. They can certainly take care of your windows. Right now, the competition is 11-7. You got the last one, Rod. I'm trying to remember. Am I picking? I think you pick first this time. So, yeah, I feel like I don't know. I don't know what's best now.
Well, I'm going to go with Jackson Kohler.
Yeah, that's easy one. Well, I'm gonna go with Cooper, obviously, and I don't believe in Zapala getting a lot of. I'm gonna go with I'll go with I'll go with Akins. I'm gonna go with Akins, and because I think he gets like 2 or 3 every game, and I feel that Carr seems more bust or boomer bust, and so I'll go with Cooper and Akins.
I'm going to go off the board, and I might pay for it, but A guy who's really been contributing. He would have been a great pick in the last game. I'm going to go with Frankie Fiddler.
Yep, that's not a bad choice. And when you're up four, you can afford to take chances, right? Yeah, you
Swing for the fence.
swing for the fences exactly. All right, that brings us to the last part of the show with the five keys of the game brought to you by Nudge Printing. If you're watching YouTube, you can definitely see my really cool quarter zip. They sell these at Nudge Printing along with hoodies and t-shirts. Super comfortable, high quality apparel. I can't stress that enough. We had a supporter at the game, the UCLA game, who's wearing our t-shirt. And he's like, I just want you to know, this is a really great t-shirt. And he didn't have to say that. So it was really nice of him to say it, but it is really, really good stuff. Also, if you want to get customized stuff like for a group or for a business or some outing or something like that, you can get to go to Fabricated Customs, and then Gabe can design it for you, and they do the graphic design as part of it. Then they do all the shipping, they do the ordering, kind of whatever you want, they can take care of. They also do some printing for stickers and things like that too. So wide variety of stuff. You can go to nudgeprinting.com to find all their selection, which not only includes Michigan State, but all kinds of other schools as well. You get 20% off, you mentioned, or I should say, if you type Final Four as one word at checkout. All right, so the first key of the game is energy. So they're coming back from the West Coast. I know I'm feeling a little bit drained, and I have not yet even gone to experience jet lag. So we're at the LAX. Of course, we've been driving. I know we drove like 300 miles today. This trip in 5 days, and we've seen. I swear, I've seen every street, and especially with the Waze program, it sent us down every side street in LA to avoid all the traffic. So we've seen a bunch of stuff. So of course, the concern is Oregon has already they've been in Michigan, so they've been in the East Coast. They're acclimated. So, and Michigan State's just coming back on a relatively short turnaround back to the East Coast. So I don't know. I mean, that's certainly something that could be a concern.
It is. I mean, you can't rule it out. I'm personally not expecting to see a problem. I think this is an area too where Michigan State's depth should help because nobody, I mean, I know we had a couple guys play 30 minutes against UCLA, which is unusual, but that's not normal. It wasn't, I don't believe it was that way against USC. And it was probably only that way in the UCLA game in part because Jace Richardson was not able to come back in. I think that affected some minutes, kind of a domino effect. But it is something that is at least worth noting. First game back after a trip like that. You hope that Michigan State is able to go out there and match Oregon's energy. And in terms of that stuff too, you could cut one of two ways. Oregon's riding a 4-game losing streak, I believe, right now. And so that can either start to really have an impact and demoralize a team, or they can start feeling like their backs are against the wall, rightly or not. And we'll see. But Michigan State will likely have to match an energetic performance from that team because that team's going to be pretty desperate to get a win. Then again, Michigan State should be as well.
All right, second key to the game is the boards, which is usually a key to the game. Obviously, one of the advantages of Michigan State's their offensive rebounding. Did really well against UCLA. The problem was they didn't get as many opportunities because they were turning the ball over so much. But from an offensive rebounding standpoint, they're very good. Also, from a defensive rebounding standpoint, they're very good against UCLA as well, and they prevented. I think what UCLA is about 20% or so. Um, so they obviously have to convert those offensive rebounds too. But this again, a team that supposedly does not rebound great, and where we've had this story before where they kind of like let up a little bit sometimes.
Yeah, and that's the concern is that, it was good performance all in all on the defensive glass against UCLA, but that follows a very disappointing one against USC. And those teams are about the same in terms of their statistical profile. So wasn't the USC's great and they just didn't manage to match greatness. It wasn't that. Oregon's profile is very similar to those teams. They are not a very good rebounding team at either end. Michigan State should, by all rights, carve out a significant advantage at both ends here, and they need to do that.
Third key to the game is turnovers. As I mentioned, Michigan State, real problem last game. Not only did they have so many turnovers, but they didn't generate any, not that we expect them to, but 3 turnovers for an opponent is not good. And Michigan State was 16. That was a ball game right there, obviously. I mean, you can't give your opponent that many more opportunities to score than you get.
Yeah, it was the single biggest advantage in that game between the two teams. If MSU's rebounding edge was significant, but not as much as that was, and the points earned by that wasn't as significant as the advantage UCLA had either. And so that was a big deal. And look, I think it's fair to describe this team as inconsistent in terms of its turnovers. There are times where they do a pretty good job of holding it down, and then there are times where they have games like they did at Pauley. And it's been that way for a while now. They got off to a strong start. First 4 or 5 games, it was pretty similar to what it was last year, which was the best turnover season, I think, in Izzo's tenure. But we've since seen a change. I think this is just who they are, which is, to be fair, is significantly better than Michigan State teams under Tom Izzo normally are in this category. That should be understood. If anybody says, "Well, it's same old, same as it ever was," I saw somebody ask on the Spartan Mag board. I don't think I had the chance to respond. You guys get tired of talking about turnovers for the last 5 years. Well, frankly, that's not true. It wasn't a problem with last year's team at all. And this year's team, although it's worse, it probably seems worse by comparison to last year's team because the fact is, if you measure what they've done against typical Tom Izzo performances, it's very common for Tom Izzo teams to be sub 200. This team is not sub 200. At least I didn't check today, but I don't believe so. But it's been a problem often enough that you have to raise it. You have to raise it as a concern. Oregon has their own problems with consistency in this area. They're not great. They're not going to remind anybody of Bo Ryan, Wisconsin, or John Beeline, Michigan. But you you need to avoid it being the kind of gap we saw at Pauley.
And the fourth key to the game is the 2-point shot. So they've been sort of a little below average. Certainly for the season. Last game against UCLA, there are a number of them they kind of missed. Jace was responsible for a couple of them, but the ones that he normally makes inside, inside 5, 6 feet, and Jade missed a layup or two. So obviously, we're not going to count on the 3-point shots for most of the point generation. It's going to be the 2 points for Michigan State.
Well, it's been a clear strength for Michigan State all year long, not just the percentage they shoot at, but when you remember that they take relatively few 3-pointers on average, it's a big part of what Michigan State does. So it is fair to measure this team's offensive output in large part by way of what they do from 2-point. Now, free throws have also been a big part of the equation as well. But I would say the bulk of that has been generated largely by the same stuff that has generated 2-point success, which means getting downhill, playing at the rim, and converting those plays or drawing contact. They didn't do either of those things quite well enough at Westwood. The latter is what it is. It wasn't entirely in their control. But the former finishing plays from two, finishing plays at the rim, as you say, a lot of guys were missing point blank shots they normally hit. And that cost them, absolutely cost them. So we got to see a bounce back in that area. This is another area where you compare what they do to what Oregon does. Looks like a distinct MSU advantage, but it's got to actually play out that way.
And finally, the fifth key to the game is a transition. Not a whole lot of transition game points generated last game against UCLA. Last to end again, yeah, right. As you mentioned, USC, where we expected some of USC, but USC did a pretty good job in transition defense. One would hope getting home, getting in sort of more familiar environment, and getting a team that tends to play a little bit faster, a team that's not doesn't have familiarity with Michigan State, not used to the pace, that they play a little bit faster. And one thing I would say that if I felt at UCLA, and maybe it was just my imagination, but I felt like Fears was not pushing as much as he usually does. And I don't know if that was UCLA was kind of squeezing him when he come across the timeline, and he's forcing him to. They're basically forcing him wide, or if that was just him not quite pushing as much.
Might have been a little bit, but I tend to give more credit to UCLA. It's what I expected to see from UCLA. Mick Cronin's a good defensive coach, if nothing else, historically. And I figured he's got an experienced team for the most part. I figured that he would have them ready to go, and they were. Michigan State did not get much. Oregon, we'll see how different a deal it is. Dana Altman's a good coach too, but Dana Altman is not a guy I think of necessarily in connection with stellar, consistent, connected defense, and not in the same way you do somebody like Cronin, certainly. So I think that his players have a lack of familiarity. I don't think very many of these guys were even on the team that Michigan State played 2 years ago in the Phil Knight 45 event. And both teams had a bunch of guys injured anyway. I don't even remember if Biddle playing. He wasn't their main big man, I don't believe, in that game. Shellstead wasn't on the team yet, so not a lot of institutional memory there. Again, Dana Altman's a good coach, so I won't say it would be a total shocker if Oregon is able to be disciplined with their floor balance. But you look at it on the surface and you think, yeah, this is one maybe Michigan State's going to get some chances. And that would be great if they do, because I think if they're able to play in the open court with some level of consistency, it's going to be very tough for Oregon to win.
All right. Well, obviously, we're both looking forward to getting back to Michigan, even though it's a little bit chilly there as we take the red eye and attempt to sleep on the on the plane. It's been a nice trip in LA. I think we're friends. We're not gonna go. The show's not over now, so that's good. we 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 haven't decided to kill each other, so that's a bonus. Michigan State obviously going for Tom Izzo will once again try and tie Bobby Knight's record for most Big Ten wins in Big Ten history, and then to try and break it against Indiana, which would be a heck of a thing. Uh, I don't know. I guess final thoughts aside from just being, it'll be nice to be back home and getting an ice cream sandwich at the Breslin Center. Do you have any thoughts about Michigan State? Obviously the worries, of course, they've lost two in a row. Does this become 3 and 4? And that's, that'd be the main concern. I don't see that, but I think that's what anytime you lose two in a row, you're worried about extending it.
I'm not concerned. I've lived too long. I've seen too many of these seasons. Really, I mean, if this was a trip to Purdue and IU, and you lost two games, so you shrug your shoulders, say, "Yeah, it's too bad," but you come to expect it. You're going to go through, and people have been talking, of course, about the traditional Izzo early February vortex, which there I don't believe in that as in terms of like there's some tangible reason that happens, but it has occurred. People pointed out the last time Michigan State started 18-2, the way this team did was in the 2018-19 season. And what happened immediately after that? 3-game losing streak. I will note that team won the Big Ten title. So, and I believe on the last day of the season at Michigan, at Breslin, who's Michigan State play the last game of the season at Breslin, Michigan. Um, Look, it's unfortunate. Look, we paid the money, we invested time to come out here. Am I disappointed they didn't win these games? Absolutely. Particularly last night against UCLA. I thought the game was there to be won, and it would have been a nice win to have. But it doesn't really mean that much in terms of winning a Big Ten title. Everything is in front of you. Winning a Big Ten title, preserving a high seed. Um, maybe a 1 seed's off the table, but I don't think it was ever really on the table realistically. So getting a 3, maybe even if you're really going a run, getting a 2, that's all still there to have. They got a ton of opportunities for big wins. And, this would be a nice one because Oregon is still sitting pretty good shape in the metrics. So even at home, you get a win like this, good win. I think they will. Uh, I I think that I think that again, I'm certainly not panicked or discouraged, as I said in our post game after UCLA. If anything, I'm a little encouraged because of the fight and the competitiveness that they showed. Even though it wasn't a sharp game in every respect, it was a highly competitive game. I thought they matched UCLA's physicality eventually. Those are all good things to see. And I think it's going to translate. I saw Tom Izzo made a comment about how he believed they got better in that game at Pauley Pavilion, and I agree. I think they did. And you can say that even with seeing obvious flaws in what happened in that game. I think you could still say on balance, they're better today for it. So, yeah, I don't think there's any reason to be feeling down about this team or think that somehow they've been exposed. I think that's utter bullshit if anybody's pushing those lines. It's not true. This is still, I think, a team that is what they've appeared to be for most of the season. A flawed team, sure, but a team with some real strengths and really important strengths, I'll note, if you want to win basketball games. The things that they do well are things that good teams typically do well. I mean, it's that simple. They got to keep doing them well, but I think we're going to see them do that. That's my expectation.
Yeah, I feel like in most seasons you have a point where the team doesn't look quite as sharp or something, and they just seem kind of broken, and then they just fix, and they just kind of, and then you think they can't beat anybody. But I don't feel like that's not the impression I got after this LA trip. Maybe after the USC trip, you're like, oh, the game, it didn't feel like kind of everything was broken, but they seemed fine and against UCLA, just didn't quite finish and things. So anyway, I'm not as discouraged.
What UCLA was the kind of loss that you've seen 100 times.
Yeah.
You go into a tough building with another team that's good, a good opponent playing in their gym, and you play hard. You don't play the sharpest you're capable of playing, and you end up losing a tight one. I've seen that movie 1,000 times. I thought Magic Johnson lose a bunch of games on the road. You think this team can't? I mean, it happens. So that's what that game felt like. It did not feel like, oh my God, the wheels are falling off.
No, I agree. They didn't look so discombobulated. And I think it does help that they have so many different moving parts that they can put in when someone's not working right. So anyway, we're gonna head back pretty soon here. And so till next time, the Final Four is on the schedule. Go green.